Where we left off last time, we had kind of the basic Pythagorean identity, which is really just the Pythagorean theorem with sine and cosine substituted for y and x. There's two other forms of this identity. Let's pretend you've got a problem where you have a tangent squared in it, and you need to rewrite the tangent squared as something else. You can turn this identity into an equivalent one using tangent squared with one simple operation. So think about, I'll give you a hint, it's division. Think about what's something you could divide by that would make a tangent appear somewhere in here. Give you a second to think. Okay, well, so here I see tangent is sine over cosine. I see I've got a sine here. So what would happen if I divide both sides by cosine squared? If I divide both sides by cosine squared, I've got cosine squared to divide. So let's split this out into two separate parts. So I've got cosine squared over cosine squared plus sine squared over cosine squared. And then this is 1 over cosine squared. So what do we have? Cosine squared over itself is 1. Sine squared over cosine squared is the same thing as if I had sine over cosine and I squared the whole thing like that. So that's just tangent squared. 1 over cosine squared is the same thing as if I did 1 over cosine quantity squared. What's that equal to? Think about it, or move your eye up the page a little bit. Aha, so 1 over cosine is secant. So that means this must be secant squared. So this is another form of that same original identity here. So here we've got sine and cosine. Here we've got tangent and secant. Let's do it one more time. Let's start with cosine plus sine squared. What if I wanted to turn this into one that involved a cotangent? So to turn it into a tangent, I divided by cosine squared because I knew that would give me a tangent. What would I have to divide by to turn one of these things into cotangent? Okay, well, let's see. Cotangent is cosine over sine. I've got a cosine squared, so if you guessed sine squared, you guessed right. So we're dividing by sine squared on both sides. When we simplify that, we've got cosine squared over sine squared. Cosine over sine is cotangent, so that's cotangent squared. We've got sine squared over sine squared, which is 1. And then we've got 1 over sine squared. 1 over sine is cosecant. So 1 over sine squared would be cosecant squared. So these are the three different forms of the identity. But really, you should just memorize this one only and realize that if you ever have a tangent squared or a cotangent squared or a secant squared or a cosecant squared, if you ever have any of these other ones, you can use the one you've memorized to create the one that you didn't memorize. So you don't need to memorize all the things. You just need to be aware that the links exist, and then you can recreate them whenever you need them. All right, that's the rest of the Pythagorean identities.